Hello and welcome to the NTI PodTalk. My name is Dianne and I'm Director of Nutrition Therapy Institute. Join me as I talk to interesting people in the field of health and wellness, food and farming, and anywhere else we find conversations that matter to our community. By listening, you'll learn a little about NTI and a lot about the things and people around you that make a difference for your wellness. Welcome and let's get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another edition of the NTI PodTalk. Today, I'm so happy to have a conversation with another one of our graduates. We love having graduates on this because it really shows our audience the caliber and quality of students that we have. And as they leave our school as a graduate, to contribute to the greater mission of educating people about the benefits of nutrient-dense whole foods. We like to have these conversations. So today I'm talking with Lauren Gardiner, who is a recent graduate, and I'm excited to have this conversation. So Lauren, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So Lauren, I have to tell you that I have a quote of yours here. So we're gonna talk about that here in a minute because it's a really fun quote that will kind of lay out the plan for what we're going to talk about. But before we get to that, let's talk about your background. Why do you even have an interest in health and wellness and nutrition? And then that, eventually led you to want to go to school. So talk about where you came from and how that process occurred for you.
Well, my mom is a nurse. She works
Right.
in ERs and ICUs like while I was growing up. So I've always fascinated to hear her stories when she would come home from night shift. And then as it came time to choose where to go to college, I knew I didn't want to be a nurse, didn't want to invest all that time to become a doctor. So I chose to become a physical therapist. And I've been a PT for almost 8 years now. I work in pediatrics, and most of my career has been dedicated to medically complex, like technology dependent children, which I really love because you get to make really deep connections with them and you get to cheer on like every little tiny milestone we celebrate.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have a traditional education in sort of conventional healthcare paradigm in physical therapy.
Yeah.
All right. So then what led you to want to go to school and learn about nutrition, which is more of a, I'm not going to call it alternative, but I usually use the word
Yeah.
complementary.
Yes, that is exactly what it was called in PT grad school. It was filed under complementary and alternative medicine. And
Right.
so it was a pretty big shift for me, but like I said, I work with medically complex kids and it's in a long-term care facility. It's kind of like a step down of a hospital. So as you can imagine, like a lot of our kids have compromised immune systems. And when the COVID-19 pandemic started, we had to be really, really strict about isolation and infection control protocols. And I think, you know, the stress of the job, but also just the stress that everybody was feeling at that time, I was under a lot of pressure and I channeled that stress into what I thought were very healthy behaviors. So I was cooking recipes that only had healthy in the title, and I was doing like these really long at home HIIT workouts, but they were, 5 to 6 days a week with not very much rest. And I started following all of the social media nutrition advice: dairy free, gluten free, soy free, corn free, low carb, no red meat, all of it.
Mhm.
Until it just came to a point where exercise was basically my only stress management tool, and my eating behaviors were getting closer and closer to like a restrict and then binge pattern.
Mhm.
And at the same time, and without very much thought, I just stopped taking my birth control pill. And I assumed, I think like most women do, that, your period's going to start up in like a month or so. But it just didn't for me. And I had this huge hormonal crash within like 2 months. terrible cystic acne and like raging anxiety and mood swings, which is so not my normal. Like I didn't even have that as a teenager.
Mm.
But so I went to my GYN, had my labs done, and she said that my lab levels were in the perimenopausal range.
Wow.
I was, yeah, I was 28. So, and honestly, at that appointment, I did not get much of an explanation otherwise, just like, oh, maybe you should cut back on exercise. But I couldn't really take that advice at the time because exercise was how I was regulating my whole self.
Mm-hmm.
So then, like, what do? We ignore it, we let it drag on, right? I was 18 months or so without a period, and I thought that that was no big deal because I didn't have a partner, I didn't want to get pregnant. Like, why do you need a period unless you're going to go for one of those things?
Mm-hmm.
And then a friend sent me a podcast episode about hormonal health. It was by like a functional medicine nurse practitioner, and I was hooked right away. I just started zipping through all these episodes and connecting to the dots, and it was just that light bulb moment. You know, the lack of period, digestive issues. A couple times when I had even fainted, the
Oh,
anxiety,
wow.
yeah, acne, and I was not interested in dating at all. Like, didn't care.
Mm-hmm.
So even though I was getting all these compliments for being a really healthy person, I was actually like woke up to the fact that I was in big time hormonal trouble. And then this episode called Food as Medicine, very aptly titled, comes up. And the host was interviewing a nutrition therapist who graduated from NTI.
Great.
Yeah. So I started incorporating the breakfast strategies that they talked about, and I got my first recovery period within like 4 to 6 weeks, I think. Um, and I signed up for nutrition counseling with that therapist, and partly to like help myself along with recovery, and then partly because I just wanted to see what NTI was all about.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if I was going to make this jump, if I was going to take on another education when I'm still paying student loans for my
Right.
first education,
Right, right, right.
I I didn't want it to be like a quickie 90-day cert, and I wanted to make sure that school wasn't too far like woo woo.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I was really convinced on NTI after a couple sessions with this therapist, and then I started online classes in June 2022, and now here we are 2 years later. I just graduated,
Nice.
and we're on a podcast.
Congratulations. Yeah, nice. Well, congratulations for finishing up and completing the program here. And I really appreciate you saying that you were looking for a school that kind of was, you know, a legitimate, in-depth, comprehensive
Mhm.
education, and that wasn't sort of fly by night and too, in your words, woo woo, and that really speaks to the fact that our program is science-based and we really prioritize that because we want to have something as the foundation of what we're teaching. And so I appreciate that you found that to be the case. All right, so the quote that I have from you, which was forwarded to me, is blood glucose, physiological stress, the hormonal hierarchy, the implications on cycle symptoms, and breakfast structure are my absolute favorite things to talk about. So that's what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah.
And that, really comes from your personal story that you just talked about.
Mhm.
So, let's talk about kind of the overarching, I think, theme of this, and that is the connection between nutrition and hormonal health. Because as you say, you really got into a desperate situation with having poor hormonal health. So let's talk about that and kind of, if you can expand on what that connection is.
Sure. Do you want to start with blood glucose or just like
Yeah.
how restrictive eating behaviors in general can lead to poor hormonal health.
Let's start with kind of just more general, and then we'll get into the blood glucose, the actual stress and cortisol, those kinds of things. So just how, you know, well, and the reason why I asked this question is because I think a lot of people don't realize that there is a very direct and intimate connection between your nutrition, what you're eating and what you're not eating, and hormone balance, because hormones are made from the nutrients, at some level made from the nutrients that we get from our diet. So, and like you say, you went off birth control and thought that your cycle would start up just sort of naturally, like, as I think you said 28-year-old woman.
Yeah.
And you came to realize that the only thing that was sustaining what seemed to be hormone balance was the fact that you were on this pharmaceutical drug. And then when you stop using the pharmaceutical drug, you realize that your own endogenous capacity to regulate your hormones was not working properly. And you made the connection between that, well, between your nutrition and stress and your hormone balance. So, from your perspective, can you talk about why that is so important from a higher level position?
Yeah. Hormonal birth control was definitely masking a lot of symptoms that I, looking back now, can trace all through my early 20s and even high school. Like when I first started my period, I was a picky eater. I was um, always on a sports team of some sort or the other. And so I just have this chronic pattern of under eating, over exercising. And I think it's really important to remember that a woman's body is constantly testing out the environment and always trying to make the decision, is it safe to ovulate and potentially have a pregnancy this month?
Mm-hmm.
You know, is and those two big things being, are nutrients available and how stressful is the environment? And if those are not in check, then yeah, the body kind of goes haywire to almost sabotage the whole process, which it can lead to some really nasty symptoms for us. But if you, it's in an attempt for the body to preserve the host, really,
Mm-hmm.
before investing all this time and energy and resources into a potential pregnancy. So
Yeah.
women's bodies are just so sensitive to nutritional deficiencies, whether that be macros overall because your blood sugar balance isn't right, or and even like the micronutrients that
Mm-hmm.
are really important for hormonal production.
I love that. That is such a good way of explaining that. Um, because pregnancy and childbirth and then the raising of children requires a lot of energy and a lot of
Yeah.
resources. And our bodies know if we're going to have those resources and that capacity to do that based on what's going on. And so the body impairs or stops the ability to actually get pregnant in the first place if those resources are not available. So I love the way you explain that. That's awesome. So let's dive into some of these very direct interactions. So what's the role of blood glucose regulation? You've mentioned, there is an influence. What is the role of blood glucose regulation and menstrual cycles?
Uh, um, this is definitely one of my favorite things because I think it's just so impactful when people finally get it and it clicks and they feel so much better. And they're like, oh my God, I can't believe I've been missing this all the time. Um, but I think the general public has this perception that blood glucose is not really something to think about, not important unless you have diabetes.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the only people that need to worry about it. The rest of us are fine. But really, everybody needs to be thinking about this, even 28-year-old seemingly healthy young women, because your insulin regulation is so intricately involved in all of your other hormonal pathways. And so, ideally we want a nice stable glucose response, that the insulin is appropriately doled out, your blood sugar curve is nice and slow and gentle on that graph, rather than seeing those steep peaks and valleys. Because when the ovaries have insulin receptors on them, and again, that is because they are constantly testing out the environments and trying to figure out what is the state of the body's nutritional stores. So if you're sending nicely modulated insulin signals to your ovaries, and they're going to know that there's plenty of food and a pregnancy could be successful. And then ovulation and hormone production can occur on schedule. But if there's massive fluctuations and your blood glucose levels are constantly up and down, your ovaries are going to sense that, oh, there might be something happening with our, food might not be available. Maybe there's not nutrient dense food available. So a pregnancy could be a real drain right now. Let's put off the sex hormone production, set that for a later time, because we need to worry about number one.
Yeah, that's really a good way to talk about that. So the other thing that you mentioned with your own story is this influence of physiological stress, both from kind of an environmental work stress type thing, as well as physical activity stress caused by over exercising. So can you talk about the relationship between stress and reproductive hormone health?
Yeah. And I kind of like to separate stress out into 3 categories. I think it just helps me like pinpoint when I'm talking to people, like what do they exactly need to address. So I like to think of it as physiological is the nutrient deficiencies, poor recovery and sleep, chronic infection, systemic inflammation. Then you have psychological stress, of course, what we all think about. But I like to remind people that it's not just the bad things. It's not just rush hour traffic and you're going to be late. It's also stuff like planning a wedding and taking a promotion. Those are very stressful too, even if they are good stresses. And then the environmental stressors, endocrine disruptor chemicals get a lot of press here because those are the most impactful on your hormones. But we should remember that any exposure to any outside chemical and toxin, all of it has to be processed through the liver. And the liver has a huge role in hormone production and keeping your ovulation on schedule. So you really got to look at the whole picture, and then remember that all stresses, no matter what type they are, boil down to inflammation and cortisol. And there's this mother hormone, pregnenolone, which it starts out as pregnenolone and it transforms into all kinds of different hormones. And ideally, you want that to be turning into progesterone for all of its beautiful, like calming and estrogen combating effects. But if your brain is constantly like, we need more cortisol, 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 pregnenolone is going to instead transform over into cortisol. They come from the same root. So that phenomenon is called the progesterone steal. And when you have lower progesterone, you're going to feel those nastier side effects of estrogen a little bit stronger, which are maybe either during ovulation in the middle of your cycle or later, that last luteal week leading up to your period. You can feel a lot of like headaches, cramps, mood swings, acne, all of the PMS type symptoms, but it can also become much more sinister and turn into PCOS, fibroids, and those like heavier diagnoses.
So is this kind of how you also get into the hormonal hierarchy? Does that come in discussing the differences between progesterone, estrogen, those kinds of things? Talk about how you identify and talk about the hormonal hierarchy.
Yeah, I don't know that this came up in our endocrinology class in NTI, but I found it when I was researching for my independent study project. And I found it in a book by Nicole Jardim called Picture Period.
Mhm.
I don't think that she made it, but it's out there. So it's a pyramid. At the top is cortisol and insulin. Across the middle, you've got pregnenolone again, that mother hormone, and DHEA. And then the bottom is going to be the ones that we're more familiar with: estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, melatonin for your circadian rhythm, and thyroid hormones. They're all tied together in for your cycle. So the concept is that if insulin and cortisol, the top tier hormones, if they are out of balance, if they are unhappy, it all flows downstream. Nobody's happy if the top tier isn't happy. So it's I think it gives people a lot of direction to be like, okay, rather than addressing all of these things at the bottom individually, doing a million different lifestyle hacks to fix my progesterone and my estrogen and my melatonin, let's just simplify. Take a minute. What are your stresses? How's your blood sugar balance doing? Start there. And then you can see the effects flow down. So it's a really interesting way to think about prioritizing hormonal strategies.
Yeah. And it's a way to get a lot of impact in a variety of areas, a variety of hormonal areas, by fixing or addressing one or two things: blood sugar regulation and stress. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so you mentioned that one of your first strategies that helped resolve your initial problems was having this breakfast. Let's see here. What are you calling it? Breakfast structure. So talk about what breakfast structure is and how that helps with hormone balance and menstrual cycle health.
Sure. So this all ties right back into the blood glucose regulation, because we know that breakfast is the most impactful meal of the day on our regulation for the whole day. Really set yourself up at breakfast. And that's because you've just come off of, let's say, 8-9 hours of sleep where you were fasting. So whatever you eat first is going to be really quickly absorbed. And then, how well did you sleep? If you slept poorly, your body's going to be looking for a lot more energy, and it wants the quick burning energy. It wants carbs rather than slow burning fats and protein. I think we don't do ourselves a lot of service in this country, as American breakfasts are very high in carbs and caffeine, which is a stimulant. So then that's going to increase your metabolic rate and increase how quickly your body burns through whatever you give it. So restructuring breakfast is just so impactful, and it can be done by shifting. We're not going to fully give up carbs. I don't want to give the impression that carbs are the absolute enemy of hormonal balance. No, like, women surely need carbs. However, shift more towards protein, fat, and fiber with breakfast so that you're getting, a more satiating macronutrient with your protein. You're getting that slow burning energy source of the fats. And then the fiber coat your intestines with its like mesh-like structure, slow everything down as it's being absorbed into the bloodstream. And that's going to help you draw out that blood sugar curve, take it from the steep peaks into that nice slow wave so that you can stay full for, 3, 4 hours. So you don't have that big 3 p.m. I need chocolate and I need a nap and I need caffeine all right now. you know,
Mhm.
um, I think the way that changing my breakfast cleared up brain fog in my day, which I didn't even really notice was happening. But as soon as I changed my breakfast, I was like, oh my gosh, it's really, really interesting.
Mhm.
Um, and if you keep up with that for a couple weeks, couple months, it's going to really quiet down those cycle system symptoms because you're sending your body signals that good, nutrient dense food is plentiful. There's
Mhm.
plenty of it. The world is safe. You can go on ovulating.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. All right. So besides changing the breakfast structure, so either eating breakfast rather than skipping
Yes.
breakfast, and changing the ratio of macronutrients and the types of macronutrients, are there any other dietary things, and and we should also talk about lifestyle things, um and you mentioned that you were an over exerciser, so what other types of changes did you find helpful for your own situation, and are you using to talk about with others?
Yeah. I think that in addition to how you structure your breakfast, eating within that 30, maybe 60 minutes of waking up is really impactful because if you don't give your body fuel soon enough, it's going to release cortisol because the cortisol is like the emergency release to break
Mhm.
glycogen out of storage, right?
Mhm.
Um, well, now you've kind of wrecked your blood sugar and your stress levels already. So eat sooner in the day. Um, Intermittent fasting is a really controversial topic in general, but it's especially talked about for women with who are still menstruating in their menstruating years. And a if you're having a lot of cycle symptoms that you're hoping to fix, I think that this is a big one. Give up the intermittent fasting and try eating breakfast a lot sooner in your day.
Mhm.
A lot of people play around with caffeine. I've always been very sensitive to caffeine. I'm occasionally a black tea person, but if you are a big on coffee and the energy drinks that are just everywhere nowadays, try reducing that as much as possible because remember that the caffeine is going to have to be processed by your liver. And the liver also needs to be, we would prefer that the liver be busy packaging up estrogen to get it out of your body so that it doesn't build up and cause those annoying symptoms. So either reduce the amount of caffeine or at least hold off on caffeine until you've eaten breakfast. You know, start with
Mhm.
water, caffeine can come in later. Um, but outside of breakfast, I would definitely recommend stretching the protein, fat, fiber formula out to all of your meals and snacks. You
Mhm.
know, if you are like me and you do not have a period or it is very sporadic, you probably, and you feel that you need to eat more, like now is not the time to only be eating 3 meals a day. You can have that morning snack, afternoon snack. Again, you're trying to give your body signals that food is in abundance. But that being said, I wouldn't just have like a pack of fruit snacks by itself.
Right.
Still structure that snack on protein and fat and fiber heavy.
Mhm.
Um, I think there's a lot of education to be done for women around the topic of healthy fats because so much of the messaging that we grew up with in the 90s and 2000s was all about low fat.
It
But
started way before that.
okay, well, I can only
In
speak from
yeah, in your lifetime, it's been the 90s and 2000s, but
yeah.
it's been going on for a long time.
Yeah, but fats are so nourishing for hormonal health because
Mhm.
in addition to being that slow burning energy that's going to keep your blood glucose steady, they've got, you need cholesterol for sex hormone production. You need vitamin D and choline for ovarian and egg quality. You need those good omega 3s to combat inflammation. Um, so bringing in fat and of course we talk about, what types of fat we want, what types of fat we don't want, but that is usually a big aha moment for a lot of people that I talk to.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I
uh,
think I think those are really great points. And back to the intermittent fasting, everybody thinks that intermittent fasting means that you skip breakfast, and your eating window, doesn't start until maybe 10 a.m. or even noon for some people. But you can still do intermittent fasting. You just shift your eating window to earlier in the day, right? Because it is more um, maybe conducive to digestive function, liver function, optimal sleep to have a longer fasting period certainly during the overnight fast, but even, several hours before you go to bed. So
mhm,
people can still practice intermittent fasting if they find benefit in doing that and just shift the eating window to earlier in the day so that you are eating breakfast, eating that first meal. You don't have to call it breakfast, but that's what it
yeah,
is. You're breaking your fast, right? Shifting that to the morning, and still having that 8 or 10 hour eating window and being done earlier in the day. So there are ways to think about these things outside of what you may hear,
is
in
like,
the
yeah, the standard model. I really like
yeah.
that point. And I would just want my client to, I'm not a big proponent of calorie counting, but I think in that instance, I would want to have some awareness on how much food she is taking in and still making sure that even if you're shortening that eating window, you're still getting enough food.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. I think some
Because
people, the traditional model of intermittent fasting is like, well, I just eat lunch and dinner.
right.
And are you missing all of those calories from that other meal? But if you can get all of
Exactly.
it in the 8 to 10 hours earlier in the day, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. I once met a guy who um was doing 4,000 calories a day, and he was cramming all of his 4,000 calories into a 4 hour eating window.
Oh my
And
gosh.
that seemed really challenging to me, but
Yeah.
absolutely. I think that when practicing intermittent fasting, you need to make sure you're getting the, adequate amount of calories and nutrient density into that eating window whenever it occurs. So I totally agree with you. All right. Well, this has been a really interesting conversation. And as you mentioned, this is what you did your final independent study project on this topic, and created your final independent study project, with the information on this topic. So you definitely have set yourself up as highly knowledgeable and, created a niche area of specialty for yourself. So, what are your career goals, and how are you going to include your newfound nutrition knowledge and passion for this subject in particular, but general nutrition knowledge? How are you going to start using this in as you go in your current career or an expansion on your career?
Yeah, that's the big question now that everybody's asking now that I just graduated.
Yeah, right now, what are
Um,
you going to
yeah.
do?
I love my job as a physical therapist. I love my kids. Eventually I want to work towards some sort of blended schedule where I'm doing, part-time pediatric physical therapy, part-time hormone health, nutrition clients.
Mhm,
Um, Pie in the sky dream is to create like a women's and children's holistic health practice that just offers all kinds of services in one location.
mhm.
But I'm usually the person with a plan. And so not having like distinct next steps is a little disconcerting to me, but I'm really working on just enjoying the slower pace and taking opportunities as they come.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's probably a good plan for yourself to not overplan.
Yes.
Um, I'm curious, are you able to use any of your nutrition knowledge in your practice as a physical therapist, or does it just not, uh,
Not really
yeah.
because almost all of my patients have gastrostomy tubes.
Ah, okay.
So they are highly monitored by a dietitian who is
Mhm,
very specialized in that field of dietetics, but
mhm.
not and the dietitian that I work with, we're in the same office. So she and I have so many food conversations, and it's very interesting to hear like she says, you know, the stuff that you know about, I learned at one time, but I learned it in such a different way. And so we have a very different perspective as holistic
Mhm,
nutrition therapists.
mhm. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, I wish you the best in however you utilize this knowledge and whatever you build for yourself. I'm sure it will be impactful to everyone who takes advantage of your knowledge. So do you have any kind of website or contact information that you want to share? And you do not have to at this point.
Okay.
You certainly
No,
don't have to, but if you're interested, you're welcome to say it out loud here. um, uh, for all to hear.
sure. I do have an Instagram account. I'm not much of an online sharer, so my summer project I think is going to be building up some educational content on there. I want to take part of my ebook. The first chapter is all about like just what actually happens during a menstrual cycle because I think women were really entitled, and unfortunately it's not well known what is even happening inside of our bodies. So I plan to put that on there and
Yeah,
all kinds of other links. But my Instagram is well rooted nutrition, and there's periods in between each word.
great. All right. Anything else you want to share before we sign off here today?
No, I think that about covers it. Thank you so
All right,
much.
good. Yeah, thank you. As I mentioned, at the beginning, I always like having graduates on because I think hearing the depth of knowledge and the, ability to clearly articulate these uh, complex concepts,
Mhm.
um, I think is what certainly we prioritize for our students to be able to develop this ability to talk about these complex issues. And I like for those who listen and watch this podcast to see that because, I want to show off what our graduates can do.
Yeah.
So thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, Diane Kaler here again. If you found this conversation interesting and haven't already become a student at NTI, check us out at ntischool.com. We hope to see you soon.